Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. Today, we're very excited to have with us Alistair Dent. He is part of the leadership team at Profusion, who are a data agency who specialize in predictive modeling, email marketing, business intelligence, and customer satisfaction. And in his role of Chief Strategy Officer, Alistair is responsible for helping Profusion's clients improve the value by maximizing the insights that they can get from their data. And what we're particularly keen to chat about is Profusion have also developed a data academy, which Alistair has been an instrumental part of, and very keen to kind of unpack that and hear his learnings from what they've been doing there. Alistair, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Jason. And thank you for such a lovely introduction. That was really nice.
You're very welcome.
All of that is really key. I will say that a lot of the time my job is to be the idiot in the room, because one of the most difficult things for our clients is trying to connect business problems to what data can do to help them. And a lot of the time, understanding the business problem in the right way is one of the best ways to do that. So I end up being the annoying guy that says, but why is that? Why? Why? And asking multiple times and trying to get deeper and deeper to really get to the levers that people can pull that can make a difference in their business. And so as a result, I'm both annoying and stupid, but in a way that actually hopefully helps us to get to the things we need to get to. And in our data academy, that's really critical, because that fundamental lack of ability to talk about business problems in a way that data can solve is the single biggest barrier that businesses have. And it's easy to talk about it and call it data literacy, but it isn't really data literacy. Data literacy, in the way most people talk about it, is, okay, do I know the difference between a mean and a median? And can I calculate a standard deviation? Or do I know the difference in a data warehouse and a data lake? And that, your data team need to know that, sure, but most people don't. But what they do need to know is what's going to happen in a data project, and what do I need to do so that I can brief people in a way that's actually going to work successfully? And how do I judge the output and know, was this reasonable, or should I have been expecting something different? And if I should, how should I have set those expectations? How would I do it next time, etc.? So for someone like me in that job of, okay, be the person in the room that asks those questions, what I do in the Data Academy is give as many people as possible the ability to do that same thing and ask those same questions, and force everybody into a framework to kind of share a common language to some extent.
So, well, there's a lot to chat about in what you described there. So firstly, I think you've by starting, you've kind of touched on something I've always felt is often the forgotten about thing in the room and sometimes the most powerful thing is that beginner mindset. So you kind of say you ask the dumb questions, but I wouldn't call them dumb questions. I would call them the questions that everybody else is too afraid to ask. And having that beginner mindset, I think, is very powerful, because if we think about the amount of times that we spend a huge amount of effort and energy trying to solve the wrong problem, instead of spending the time to try and figure out what the right problem was to solve. And it reminds me of one of my all-time favorite quotes from Einstein, who said, if I had 20 days to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 19 thinking about it. Is often we don't really kind of challenge ourselves to think, are we even solving the right problem here? And we just launch in and try and fix the thing that's in front of us. But
That's really interesting.
yeah.
We had an instance where we had two people in the room. We had an operations manager and a data analyst from the same company. And the operations manager was saying, okay, well, we always overbook the the amount of work that we can do, knowing that some of it is going to get cancelled. But it means about half the time I need to make an active decision about which of our activities to cancel. And the analyst looked at him and said, "Oh, is that what you wanted? Because what you asked me for was a dashboard that showed sales per region and the number of activations that are happening and listed out all of these metrics." And that operations manager had thought about his problem and had come to a conclusion about, okay, well, here is how I specify what it is that I need in order to make my decisions, and given the analyst that brief. And because the analyst hadn't understood the purpose of it, they could make exactly what was asked for, but couldn't actually make any judgment decisions. There are a million judgment decisions that any white collar worker has to make in their job. You can't brief task and treat people like a robot. And so he wasn't able to make those judgment decisions. And so he produced what was asked for. What was asked for wasn't quite right. And they had to go through that entire process again with the analyst actually understanding the brief, because that ability to what you just said, ask the right question in the first place. And really, the data analyst is able to interpret that question if they get it in the right format. If what instead they get is a robotic brief, then they can't use their judgment at any point.
I believe that you've just summarized the entire IT industry in a few paragraphs. Oh, no, he didn't. Yeah, I mean, it is such a common issue, right? And I think it permeates so many different things. Of course, what I'm also curious, I mean, so there's two big conversations, I think, here. I mean, one is I mean, I'd love to find out, like, where the Data Academy came from, like what some of the big challenges are that you've kind of like hit as you've kind of created this Data Academy, and where some of your big insights and learning lessons, especially as someone as you said to me before we started, who's actually delivered a lot of content. I'm really fascinated to kind of get a sense of the Data Academy, like the key learnings, because I think a lot of people look at learning from an organizational perspective of, I've got people inside the organization to train, and a lot of conversations we've had here are all about the new emerging role of learning and development, and kind of doing almost what you guys have done is how do we kind of create this as a business entity in its own right, that has marketing challenges, that has people challenges, that has messaging, or like and like frameworks and impacts and like skilling people up. So and then on the other hand, I think that there's a big element around metrics and kind of how we bring those two worlds together. But let's start with kind of the Data Academy, and I'd love to hear the story of it.
So where it came from and then where we ended up deciding to go with it were two different things, and there was a learning process for us along the way. Because where it came from was our CEO, Natalie, who was new into the data when she took over at Profusion, had come from a background running charities and volunteering organizations and education businesses, and her basic kind of query was, what are the things I wish I'd known? And that, from a leader's perspective, what are the things that I would have been more effective had I known these in my previous jobs? And that ended up being kind of the starting point for the Academy. The place it came from is there are so many leaders who are so afraid of the sheer size of learning required in data that they just don't want to start. They're not afraid of learning it. They're smart people and they know they can learn it, but they're afraid of it's going to be too big for me to bother getting into. I won't make any, there's no benefit to me in doing 8 hours of learning. I would need to do 100, so why should I start? And they're so afraid that they haven't. And so that means there's loads of leaders who are asking that question, like, what do I need to know? And so that kind of launched the Data Academy really as a vehicle for one flagship program, which was Data for Leaders. Because we were responding to that question, what do I wish I'd known as a leader? We built a program that took leaders through everything that they need to know around how a data project is structured, how to build a data team, how to ask the right questions, that sort of stuff. And the more people we spoke to, the more people we trained, the more we went through this process, the more we realized this isn't just a leadership question. This is an organizational question. And again, we're very hesitant around the term data literacy because A, it's quite rude to just call people illiterate and or imply that they are. And B, really data literacy and those kinds of things I was mentioning earlier around, the mechanics of data is just kind of the data team that really needs to know that. So instead, it wasn't about data literacy. It was more about finding a common language. So when we built the programs, we worked very closely with researchers from INSEAD Business School. So INSEAD had done a fairly sizable research project about why so many data and analytics projects don't deliver the value that they promised in the first place. So they build the business case and they work out the costs and benefits, and then either it costs far more or it delivers far less. And they did a lot of research about why that is the case. And that lack of a common language is the root cause of why the expectations aren't set very well. So what we ended up doing instead was saying, actually, that core program is actually 3 programs for 3 different audiences. There's a data for leaders part of it to understand how do I run a business that has a data culture? How do I know what I'm getting into when I'm doing analytics projects? But also, there's a kind of like a data fundamentals for business teams. Just that I'm the person who, in my day job, has to engage with an analytics function or do some reporting myself. And what is it that I need to know so that I can share a common language with the data specialists? And then the third part is almost a stakeholder management for data specialists. That reminder that you are dealing with people who are not experts in your subject, but are very, very smart. They're very good at what they do, but it's not what you do. And how do you make sure that when you're working on these programs and doing this analysis, people believe it, people trust it? We had a guy in from a very large omni-channel retailer, hundreds and hundreds of stores in the UK alone. And they had run an incentives program, like a promotion the year before. And they were delighted with how it went. It drove so many extra purchases. Months later, he ran the numbers on it, and it turned out that was not incremental at all. Not only did the loss of margin from running the promo outweigh the incremental sales, but actually most of those incremental sales were just pulled forwards from later weeks. So there weren't very many incremental sales at all, and it was a net loss to the company. And he reported back, and they didn't really believe him. And they said they want to run it again. They were like, okay, well, that's interesting analysis, but this time will be different, it'll be fine. And they ran it again, and it didn't work again. And he was sitting there asking me, how do I persuade them to actually pay attention? I know what I'm doing, I've run the numbers, how do we get it to do? So that third pillar is kind of that. It's helping the data experts to speak the language of the business teams, to understand the commercial imperatives, to understand the levers that the company can pull, and more importantly, levers they can't, that might seem amazing from a data perspective, but actually, the business circumstance means we can't do that. Oh, we need to increase our price by this amount, it would make all this difference. And the business person says, sure, but my competitive pricing means I can't make it happen. So those 3 work together to try and bring everybody into that same common language to be able to successfully work out what it is you want to do, to be able to explain it to each other, and to be able to keep track of those projects so that they actually deliver the value. So it was very much that 2-stage process. That first question that prompted the data for leaders, and then that understanding of that INSEAD research. And we actually hired one of those researchers who is now a full-time data strategist within Profusion to help us to understand how do we put that together and really kind of make that learning both the right learning and then make it stick.
And I think for many organizations probably could learn a lesson, and I'm guessing there's another whole perspective to the academy as well, which is in many ways what you've kind of alluded to is having to educate your customer, right? To kind of the more your customer knows and understands how to use the right language, the right terminology, be more efficient and effective, the knock-on effect of that is obviously that it has a very positive impact on your ability to kind of service customers, right? So I think a lot of the learning and development that's going on in organizations at the moment is probably very internally focused, and I think that there's a very interesting lesson here for a lot of organizations to start thinking about, well, how do you start externally focusing your learning and development? What are some of the kind of upsides and benefits to that? So, I mean, have you seen kind of a noticeable correlation between, and obviously understand, I mean, this was obviously started by the CEO who had a deep intrinsic desire to kind of help and educate people, but have you guys seen a big kind of correlation between running this academy and the growth of your business?
Yeah, we have. So I think there's two parts to it. One is for our customers, when we started it, we were expecting to be dealing with CEOs and operational teams, helping to run their business better. But the single largest, like not a majority, but the single largest set of our customer base are sales and marketing departments who are using data all the time and are doing it to what you said, like how they work with customers. So even for our customers, it's that outward face is becoming more and more of a thing. For us, in terms of how that has sort of supported growth of our business, it's been really clear. One is it makes it very obvious that we're not a consultancy like the sort of the big strategic consultancies. Actually, myself and our CEO are both ex-Big Four consultants from way back, and we've sort of seen what that looks like. And that come in, just drop the PowerPoint presentation and leave. It doesn't work. It leads to that same project failure problem. So it was really, really key for us to say, actually, if Profusion is doing data consultancy, is coming in and giving that strategic advice, we need to be able to back it up by embedding that. We need to be able to support the cultural change in the business to be able to not just embed this particular data product, but to be able to know in the future which one should I have, how do I run them, and so that really set us apart a little bit from a lot of other businesses who are quite mechanical. And instead, our lead is, your problem isn't mechanical. The mechanical bit is, well, it would be an oversimplification to say easily solved, but there are loads of choices for you if all you want is something mechanical. The reason to work with Profusion is because really the Data Academy and the core principles within that affect everything that we do with you. And our job isn't done until you have a culture that can take advantage of the work that we're doing with you. So it's been really transformational, both in how we work with our existing customers and how we go to market. And our entire positioning has very much shifted since the Data Academy has existed to that understanding of, yeah, you need to do the data work. You need to do the analysis. You need to build the infrastructure, whatever. But getting benefit from that is going to largely come down to, can you get the L&D in your organization to make these ways of working stick? And everybody be on the same page, share that language and understand how it's going to help you.
So there's another part that I wanted to kind of hook off, which is the exact example that you gave of this kind of sales guy dealing in this kind of big omni-channel customer, which I think is something that I've heard mirrored in the same but slightly different way. Is there's a big part of the learning and development community that talks about wanting to get a seat at the table. In other words, they want people to understand the impact that learning and development has or can have in their organizations. And sitting at the heart of that, and I think you've touched on both of these, is one, understanding how metrics and data can essentially present the impact of what you're doing. But almost more importantly is being able to elevate metrics and data, which are not necessarily very exciting in isolation, with compelling storytelling to actually bring data and insights to life. And it seems like you guys have got quite a bit of experience and knowledge on that. And if you were in the shoes of, kind of a customer looking to, like the guy in the omnichannel example did, like looking to really try and drive home the impact of the metrics, what would be some of the kind of advice that you would be giving to these people?
Oh, so I love this. And the kind of data storytelling is my absolute sweet spot, right? That's where I sit. My background is, before joining Profusion, was from marketing agencies, doing marketing and sales, etc. And I'm a huge fan of that storytelling to try and persuade an audience. And using data to try and make a case is exactly the same as storytelling in the way and that a really creatively minded person would do it. And so when we teach data storytelling, we do it trying to take lessons from literature, right? The best of novelists and playwrights on how to make a story impactful, how to get that contrast between tension and release. And you've got this macro tension at the biggest stage of what's the world now, right? Where something is going wrong, or we don't understand what's happening, but things aren't okay. The status quo is not adequate for where we want to be. And then there's, at the end of your presentation, the future world, where things are going to be amazing. Like, if you trust the data and take the actions that I'm recommending, we are going to make more money, pass our competitors, whatever those business goals are. And you've got to lay that contrast and frame that huge difference. And then within that, you've got the how do we get there? And you've got little types of mini contrasts for different parts of the audience. The CFO is going to say, how much is this going to cost me? And have you taken into account all the risks? And yes, we have. Here's the mitigation. And your line manager is going to be saying, well, I want my team to look really good, so we're coming out of this looking really smart. And the CEO is saying, does this get me strategically where I care about going? And thinking about the different categories of people in your audience, their individual motivations. So we work on perspective shifting exercises. So how do you put yourself into somebody else's shoes to try and understand what they care about? Because it's not as simple as it's going to sound from the job title. And we work on literary techniques to try and create these different types of contrast to that tension and release, and have an arc, almost like the hero's journey, right? The same. If it works for Star Wars or Indiana Jones, it's going to work for your data-driven presentation. And so how do you set up those stakes and make that work? We talk a little bit more mechanically as well about good charts versus bad charts, and how to make data visible at a glance. Don't make your audience do the cognitive work of interpreting your table, and show them the thing they need and the context. And both of those have got to take a fraction of a second to understand. And there's tips and tricks for doing that well, mostly pioneered by journalists. Journalists are amazing at that trick of saying, here's the fact and here's the context, and wrap that in a way that you can understand in a fraction of a second. But you can put all of this together in really simple frameworks that mean, we've all read incredibly formulaic novels that you think, okay, they've basically written this by numbers. And it's, as a result, it's not the best thing I've ever written, but it can still be a guilty pleasure. It can still be fun. And those frameworks can take somebody who is really uncomfortable with presenting, really uncomfortable with selling themselves, and maybe lacks a bit of that confidence in a room with big decision makers in it, and take you from bad to good. It can't take you from good to great. That needs that little layer of inspiration, but it can always take you from bad to good, and it's so easy to do.
Yeah, and I think I've seen so many different scenarios where just telling a really kind of compelling story, and even sometimes the quietest person in the room, just telling something in the story has got everybody to sit up and go, wow, okay, I didn't see that coming, and really fundamentally actually changing behaviors. So if we kind of jump on past storytelling, there's and I know, having seen some of the articles you've written, that you kind of look a lot at emerging technologies, and being someone who is kind of very immersed in the data storytelling, bringing kind of insights and data to life. And looking at, I think one of the things that have been a bit of a challenge to me in whether it's marketing or learning and development is being able to kind of identify and create really impactful data and measurements, and start to utilize those to really kind of addressing behavior change, right? Because everything we do, whether it's data, whether it's learning content, whether it's marketing, ultimately, if you kind of sweep everything away, what we're trying to essentially kind of emulate is some kind of behavior change. And data sits at the heart of that, and storytelling sits at the heart of that. But we're starting to now see some of this emerging technology, kind of Web3, metaverse, AI. How are you seeing this changing the data landscape? Because suddenly now we're getting all sorts of unique new types of data, new types of insights, much larger volumes, and it must be changing ye old dashboard that many organizations have been running on for decades, and like some of the kind of balanced scorecard, the good old ones that you learn in your MBAs.
So yes and no. On the yes side, particularly the emergence of generative AI is really changing how people can do their jobs and what that means. And that there is an enormous ethical question. There's a question around data ethics in generative AI, with what are you sharing, how is it built, how much of what it creates is theft, and there are significant business questions to be answered before just diving in with both feet. And the problem is you can't be the business that doesn't dive in, and all your competitors do, and become twice as productive in some roles, like developers, for example. And so you can't afford not to, but if you do, you risk making some significant ethical missteps if you're not thinking your way through those problems. So it's a huge shift from that perspective, these capabilities that change how we do our jobs, and it's not as simple as just saying, great, let's do it. There are deeper questions. But on the no side, a really good data question, a really good metric in a dashboard, isn't just measurable, which is where most people start, right? There's table stakes, right? If I can't get that piece of data, then okay, who cares? And it needs to be that, and be able to be presentable and be accurate and be timely and so on. But it also needs to be actionable. If you have a piece of data where the thing you would want to change off the back of it is either nothing, or a thing that I can't change, where I just don't have the lever. Oh, the thing I need to change is the state of the economy. Brilliant. Like I can't do it. Then it's kind of pointless. But it also, as well as being measurable and actionable, it has to be strategic. It has to be something where it actually impacts on the fate of the company. And there's various different measures. Then what is strategic will be different for every business. It normally stems from either making more revenue or saving more cost. But how that happens depends entirely on your business model and your circumstances and what you're trying to achieve. Yeah. So is it changing dashboards? Is it changing that landscape? From that perspective, no. Because those things don't change. That's core. Is it measurable, actionable, strategic?
Yeah.
those are all the same. And what metrics you care about that meet those criteria haven't changed. But from the other side of things, like how are we looking at how we use these things day to day? Because technology isn't a data answer. No matter how much a technology business will say, we will get you better results because we use the latest machine learning thing. Technology is not the data answer because they haven't asked all of your questions about what am I trying to do, what is going to be material for me. So technology enables things we couldn't do before, and that is awesome. But the data questions don't necessarily change, and the biggest change in the data questions...
Let me ask you a question, maybe just delving into that with maybe some more specifics. So, you know, and let's talk a moment about the future of work, right? There's this kind of big trend talking about the future of work, how technology, the pace of technology is rapidly kind of accelerating, and we're seeing these technologies, and like you've described, kind of large language models that are kind of going to start to bring more automation in and kind of elevate human beings to kind of focus on higher order types of problems, like things that require problem solving and critical thinking. And as part of this, you know, we should start seeing a shift away from more traditional kind of learning courses, you know, things that maybe start shifting away from that more into these kind of, and for want of a better term, these soft skills. Now, historically, if I was in an organization and I was training leaders, and I can speak with absolute kind of experience because I've been on both sides of the table, it's really very difficult to measure and provide data on whether leadership training is really effective. You know, it's a lot of anecdotal information, you know, some guy coming out and saying, oh, that was a really great course, but you can't actually specifically say, well, these are the things I can measure on it, and that's why I think that you've shown a visible sign of improvements. And the line manager or the kind of person's kind of reporting line might say, look, I've noticed, you know, kind of he's a little bit more confident in meetings. But, you know, with kind of analytics now, you know, things like sentiment analysis, things like eye tracking in kind of VR headsets, you're now starting to get a series of data and metrics that are coming into this conversation, which are starting to kind of directly speak to the ability to measure confidence, measure how you respond under pressure, be able to see if you're making good eye contact, be able to understand if you're projecting your voice, if you want to kind of learn how to tell a great story to a room full of people. Are you kind of seeing those metrics starting to appear? I mean, have you guys given some thought to what this might change in terms of the landscape of data?
That's a good question, and definitely one that I do not know as much about, given that our training involvement is delivering training in, frankly, a relatively traditional sense on a relatively new topic. Because the metric that the companies we're talking to, from that leadership, training perspective, it tends to be less of a how has this leader gone away and implemented these things, and more of a what's the risk of our business if our leader doesn't understand this, and this is all happening around us, because these are strategic questions. If the data infrastructure, and there's a huge move from on-premise to the cloud, and you've got your DevOps team saying, we need to get onto the cloud architecture right now, we need to be on AWS or Azure, and then you've got people in the business saying, oh, I should be using ChatGPT in my day job, and you've got competitors putting out PR pieces, oh, we've just gone all in on this new Oracle software that lets us do this amazing AI stuff. You don't want to be lost in that landscape, but it's not necessarily what the action is that you take from it depends entirely on your business. It's very hard to understand quite what is that metric for the type of training that we're doing. It's very much by having an awareness you can make a different decision, but the end result of that decision is hard to predict in advance. So I think I would say I'm a little bit out of the loop on the like using some of those like amazing sounding kind of metrics to just measure the success of learning. What I would think as a again, position myself right at the start of this as a trainer, not a learning expert, is like, from my perspective, I would be fascinated to have that at my fingertips, but I couldn't tell you in advance what I'd do with it. And that always makes me worry, in the same as any analytics project, until I don't want to collect any data until I know my use case. Because when I know my use case, I know why I'm collecting it, in what format, for what I'm trying to do through that. So yeah, I've got, I would say, mixed feelings. Not in a sense that I'm against it, but in a sense that I don't yet know exactly what I would change as a result of having it.
Yeah, and I think that's always the kind of challenge with emerging technologies and rapidly kind of shifting ways of working. Is it it takes a while for some of these things to become clear and obvious, and yeah, I mean, I can imagine that this is often the space that, you know, kind of whoever in the organization is driving learning, whether it's internally focused or externally focused, is probably asking themselves as well, is, yeah, why change the kind of the thing that I've had now? Like, why bring in all these new technologies? How can I realistically use this data? Why is it going to make things better? Versus just bringing in more complexity and more things to worry about. And of course, that sits at the heart of all new emerging technologies. You know, until they, I guess, really find a niche, they are very difficult for people to kind of justify inside their organizations. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm really always very curious about data, because, you know, my past life, I was also into big data analytics and have always understood the significant role data and information actually plays, and how it's probably one of the most underrated thing, and even is why I ended up going into human genetics, because we walk around every day with the most incredible data set in the world, which is our human genome. So yeah, big data nerd. So just kind of bringing this to a little bit of a close. There's always two questions I like to ask. The first one is really just, you know, how we can bring value to the people watching, you know, and it's almost crystallizing everything we've kind of done here, and you know, your expertise very much on data. You've got the kind of the data academy, and my question to you would be, if you were in a organization, for instance, where you were still finding yourself maybe a little bit trapped in that old way of thinking of learning and development. It's kind of like a silo in the business that line managers come to, and they just say, oh, I want the following training for the following people, and it must basically fit within this budget. But if you were trying to kind of reframe that conversation towards, you know, how I would start to get people to understand the significance of this function inside the organization, how it can be a really strategic function, what kind of advice would you be giving that person?
That's a brilliant question. So, limiting it to thinking from a data perspective, because that's kind of where I'm coming from. I would be saying that most traditional training courses on data are trying to teach practitioners, or trying to take someone and convert them into a practitioner, and it gets into jargon. It gets into, hey, okay, here's the difference between an ETL and an ELT pipeline, and here's why you would choose them, and it's going to go over people's heads. People, when it comes to data, and this is true of a lot of difficult topics, they think, oh, that's too big for me to easily learn, therefore I won't learn, and they switch off. And they see a problem, and they either shut down or they pass it over the fence to someone else and say, oh, I'm not good at that. The reason some people almost pride themselves on not knowing maths. It reaches the point where you think, oh, that topic is so huge, I can't start, therefore I won't start, therefore I have to find pride in where I'm at instead. And it becomes a bit like that with data. So You get traditional training programs around data that just try and plow in as if that isn't a problem. So instead, I would say, no. You're not trying to train people on data. Training people on data isn't going to work, because if they got the right brain for it, they kind of already get it. If they don't have the right brain for it, they're not going to start. Instead, you're giving people this common language around asking the right questions, around how to ask a business question that data is well suited to solve. So I would be saying to the people in that business, okay, actually, don't put me through something on Coursera. Don't give me access to those. Instead, get everybody into a room with somebody that can show us those frameworks for how we work together on this topic, and how everybody's different perspective is important, instead of trying to teach people a specialist skill that they can't easily learn.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, I would also advocate that everybody should understand the value of data, and everybody should understand the value of storytelling. And if only there was somebody who was doing some training on the intersection of data and storytelling, that would be amazing, right? So,
if only.
Yeah, if only. So, yeah, by all means, go and check out Profusion, and go and have a look at their data and storytelling course, because that sounds pretty awesome. Final question for you is, we always like to finish off on something that you've read or listened to recently that has left you like rethinking about something, having an aha moment, or a like whoa moment, something that's kind of impacted you.
Oh, that is a brilliant question. And so the answer to that, the straight up and simple bit of that answer, is a book called This Is Marketing by Seth Godin. Now, Seth Godin has been writing marketing books for feels like decades now. And they all kind of approach the same sort of problems from a different angle. And I have a problem with almost every business book I've ever read, which is the first third of it is worthwhile, and after that it's restating the same things in different ways with different scenarios, use cases, examples, etc. And it's true of this one as well. Like, you could read the first third of it and know everything that matters in that book. But if you're open to that, it is an entirely different way than how most marketers are trained to look at marketing, and the value of understanding the levers you can pull, the levers you can't, and how to not change people's minds, but to find the people whose perspective is already aligned with your own and deliver the right message to them. And it is, as a result, absolutely fascinating, and a real condensation into one small place of material that otherwise takes 10 years to learn by doing.
Brilliant. And yeah, I mean, I think, specifically to our audience who might be thinking, well, knowing more about marketing is not for me, I would say that much like Daniel Pink kind of wrote a book many years ago called To Sell is Human, to market is something we need to do in every action every day. And the belief that you aren't a marketer is, I think, a fundamental flaw that most people have. So sounds like an incredible book. I haven't actually read it yet, which is very surprising because I'm a big Seth Godin fan. So I'll definitely jump right onto that. Sounds fascinating. So Alistair, I just wanted to say it's been absolute joy and a privilege to have you. I've learned quite a lot from your wisdom. Looking forward to kind of just going back a little bit and just refreshing some of my old data skills again, because sometimes you forget about these things when you've got 50 other things on your mind. So it's been really, really wonderful having you, and thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. It has been so fun to chat.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.